Hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde. We are happy that you're here with us for our final chapter of our Policy Lab adventure. Nous allons faire notre présentation en français et en anglais selon la langue de préférence de chaque personne. Pour les questions à la fin, sentez-vous à l'aise de les poser dans la langue de votre choix. We will be presenting in French and English in accordance with the preferred language of each individual. For questions at the end, feel free to ask them in the language of your choosing. So let's go into our policy challenge. Our policy challenge was to assess the needs and feasibility for a noise observatory in Montreal. We were asked to evaluate the issue of noise in Montreal and to examine the range of noise management strategies that could help the city improve its current approach. Moving on to our objectives was to evaluate the needs and feasibility in the context of the city of Montreal, based on international jurisdictional examples, to design a personalized strategy for the city that accounts for Montreal's unique reality and identity. So here's a table of contents that will be structuring today's presentation. Our report includes a total of 37 recommendations. Now, this is a lot, which is why we will not be presenting them in details. The purpose of this presentation is that you get an idea of the particular model we suggest for Montreal without going into grave detail of each recommendation we suggest. But before we get started, we decided it would be best to define just what noise is. Noise is an unwanted sound, as well as a sound whose level is sufficient to cause adverse health effects. The World Health Organization, or the WHO, has a set recommended limit of 55 decibels, beyond which is considered pollution and an issue. With increasing urbanization and densification, the common issue of mixed sounds obstructing the health of residents and the environment has increasingly become a policy issue. To put things into perspective, $830 million was the estimated cost of transparent noise in Quebec in 2017. If you're wondering how noise can be costly, we'll elaborate on that further as we go through our presentation. Further, 60% of Montrealers have reported being affected by noise levels higher than WHO recommended levels. This shows us that noise abatement is a costly and important issue that needs to be addressed in the province as well as in the city of Montreal. So for our research methodology, we decided to look at three main components in conducting our research. We conducted a literature review, analyzed 11 benchmark jurisdictions, and interviewed experts from all around the world. Now let's dive into the noise situation in Montreal. Noise in Montreal is a complex issue that necessitates the involvement and collaboration of numerous stakeholders. As we have seen through our research, Montreal isn't unlike many other cities in their sources of noise, and further, in demonstrating the link between lower socioeconomic status and higher levels of noise exposure. For roads and railways, hundreds of thousands of residents are exposed to excessive transport noise during daytime and nighttime hours. Of its 1.8 million households, about 175,000 households on the island of Montreal are located less than 50 meters of a major road, while 68,000 households are located within 150 meters of a railway track. Further, aircraft and airport-related noise is the most well-documented noise issue in Montreal, with around 34,000 households being located in areas that are highly exposed to air traffic noise. With numerous complaints and even a class action lawsuit against the Montreal Trudeau International Airport, the debate over aircraft noise in Montreal has become a high-profile issue for communities. Leisure-wise, there remains friction between residents, venues, and boroughs that have led to the closing down of different venues. These analyses show us that tackling noise is not just limited to what's visible on the slide, but is rather a multifaceted issue that is not so black and white, and moreover requires comprehensive strategies to meet the demands of all stakeholders. So let's go a bit into what Montreal is currently doing in regard to its noise strategy. Within the government approaches, noise management in Quebec currently falls under the portfolios of at least 10 provincial ministries, 11 governmental organizations, and over 1,000 municipalities. In Montreal itself, noise policies vary between boroughs, making it difficult for the city officials and enforcing officers to provide stakeholders with a clear response to noise-related issues. This often leads to police involvement and friction created between businesses, boroughs, and residents. As such, the complaints-based mechanisms in the city do not maintain consistency, with residents generally unclear of whether they should call 911 or 311 in regard to noise complaints. This creates difficulty in responding to noise complaints, with the burden often falling on law enforcement to go and check on a consistent issue that otherwise would not necessitate their involvement. And increasingly, due to lack of clarity, other non-governmental approaches and private organizations have been stepping up and taking it upon themselves to introduce noise abatement strategies. So next, I'm going to be passing it on to Sta, who will be taking on from there.
Thanks, Aria. So in order to understand why noise is an important policy problem, we need to understand its impacts. Part of the fundamental difficulty with understanding noise is just how subjective people's experience of noise can be. Noise also has disproportionate and diverse impacts on the population. In our research, we found that there are 4 main categories for noise impacts that are relevant for policymakers, researchers, and the public. The first one is public health. The effects of noise on public health are the most well documented, with a considerable body of research that shows correlation and causal effects between high levels of noise for an extended period of time and health issues such as sleep disturbance, hearing impairment, stress and cardiovascular disease, and cognitive and memory issues. From the few studies that have been conducted in Montreal, we know that noise does have a public health impact on our population. A study found that 20% of the Montreal population has reported sleep disturbance due to environmental noise such as cars, nightlife, and airplanes. The second important impact of noise is on the economy. Noise has considerable cost to society, particularly with regards to healthcare costs and noise abatement costs. The Quebec Ministry of Health and Social Services has estimated that the costs caused by transportation noise alone was $830 million in 2017. This would include the cost to the healthcare system for treating noise-related health issues, as well as noise abatement strategies that governments implement, like sound barriers, additional policing, sound limiters, and additional staff to handle 311 noise complaints. Real estate is another sector where data shows the impact of noise pollution. An assessment showed that the estimated depreciation rate for residents that are near the Canadian airports was around 0.82% per decibel. And for residences that are near major roadways, the depreciation was 0.5% per decibel. The third impact is environmental impact. As humans, we are becoming more and more aware of our impacts on the environment and other species. Emerging research shows that underwater noise is an issue for port cities like Montreal, whose human activities impact underwater animals such as fish and whales in our local ecosystem. Noise from ships can cause temporary or permanent hearing loss in fish, disrupt their breeding habits, and mask their ability to detect predators. Research also suggests a similar effect on birds, whose migratory patterns and nesting behaviors are affected by noise pollution in cities. Lastly, the fourth area of impact, which is perhaps the most interesting for Montreal, is soundscapes. It is important to note that sound is an umbrella term. It includes unpleasant sounds, which we often classify as noise, but there's also pleasant sounds which are captured in the field of soundscaping. In fact, pleasant environmental sounds such as birds singing and water flowing can actually improve the quality of life of residents. A 1984 study highlighted how the psychological and physical health of patients in a hospital was positively impacted by the sounds of nature nearby. This important approach to sound studies has important policy implications for cities like Montreal. It reminds city planners that yes, there are significant negative impacts of noise to health, the economy, and the environment, but noise reduction should not be the only goal. The preservation and the promotion of positive sounds should also be a policy goal. With regards to policy, different approaches exist to managing noise around the world. First is the regulatory approach. This is the approach that most cities rely on, which often consists of city councils implementing regulations on noise levels and quiet areas. This often creates a patchwork of regulations across jurisdictions, as we see in Montreal, and it is heavily reliant on police and city employees for enforcement. The strictly regulatory approach to noise has been implemented around the world, yet noise remains a persistent and even growing urban problem. This is partly because cities lack the data to make effective regulations and enforcement tactics. Enforcement itself is expensive, and certain noise issues such as road and aircraft noise are difficult to mitigate because of their interjurisdictional nature. The various levels of government that are involved in regulating noise can also be a challenge. Transportation-related noise in particular is difficult and resource-intensive as an issue because it requires municipal, provincial, and federal actions. The next approach is night mayors. Night mayors are a new policy approach that began in the early 2000s. Almost 50 cities worldwide, including Toronto and New York City, have hired nighttime economy managers who act as advocates for nightlife industry with policymakers and help develop partnerships. Night mayors are interesting policy approaches because they respond to the issue of nightlife and nighttime related noise, but they only cover one aspect of noise, which is nighttime noise. The last and the most exciting approach is noise observatories. Observatories are advisory institutions that study specific issues, analyze them, and develop expertise and solutions in response to those issues. Noise observatories install sensor networks across jurisdictions to measure sound levels, generate noise maps, and understand the quality of noise and sound in a city. They help cities design more targeted policy, help them monitor noise, and test the effectiveness of their bylaws. Observatories have also become collaborative centers where stakeholders such as residents, businesses, industry, and government can come together to build solutions to noise and understand its impacts on the economy, health, culture, and other sectors. Compared to the strictly regulatory approach that lacks the necessary data, or the night mayor approach, which only focuses on nighttime noise, the Noise Observatory arises as a best approach for Montreal in addressing noise issues. The Noise Observatory brings data and knowledge that a city like Montreal needs to develop noise policy, and it offers a roundtable for various actors to come together. In sum, noise observatories help cities develop data-driven, evidence-based policy. And now I'll hand it over to Janoah to talk about observatories around the world.
Merci, Sta. Pour mieux comprendre l'expérience internationale de gestion du bruit, nous avons étudié 11 observatoires des juridictions de référence. Pour identifier les meilleures pratiques, 4 questions ont guidé nos résultats. Premièrement, quel est le type de structure des observatoires de référence? La majorité des observatoires étudiés font partie du gouvernement, souvent en tant qu'une division du département de l'environnement. 4 observatoires étudiés sont indépendants du gouvernement, soit académiques ou comme organisation de but non lucratif. Même si la majorité des juridictions gèrent leur stratégie de bruit comme faisant partie du gouvernement, notre recherche suggère que celles qui bénéficient d'une grande indépendance sont les plus efficaces pour gérer le bruit d'une manière holistique. Deuxièmement, les observatoires sont-ils une organisation réglementaire ou une organisation consultative? Les juridictions de référence qui font partie du gouvernement sont capables de créer les règlements. Pour les observatoires qui sont indépendants du gouvernement, ils ont seulement un pouvoir consultatif. Mais ces organisations ont un fort lien avec le gouvernement municipal et agissent comme un conseiller clé pour le développement des politiques de gestion de bruit. Troisièmement, quelle est la structure de financement des observatoires? Les observatoires étudiés, qui existent comme une partie du gouvernement, sont financés par le budget d'opération du gouvernement. Et pour les observatoires académiques, ils sont financés par les subventions de recherche. Par contre, les observatoires à but non lucratif ont les structures de financement les plus complexes. Ils reçoivent environ 50% de leur financement des différents niveaux de gouvernement, soit régional ou national, et l'autre 50% des subventions de recherche et des autres sources. La diversité de financement donne à ces observatoires un niveau de financement avec indépendance et stabilité, tout en restant utile au gouvernement municipal. Quatrièmement, quelles sont les activités clés de l'Observatoire? Même s'il y a une diversité d'activités dans les juridictions de référence, elles sont, la plupart, divisées en 5 catégories. La collection de données, la recherche et le développement, collaboration avec les parties prenantes, la sensibilisation du public et soundscaping, ou les arts du son. So maybe for a moment, if we go back 2 slides, you can look at the 11 benchmark jurisdictions that we studied. They're from around the world, mostly in Europe, but also in other areas. And going forward, we identified 6 key lessons from these 11 benchmark jurisdictions that inform our proposed observatory model. Lesson number 1 is that a purely regulatory approach is not enough. Examples from benchmark jurisdictions demonstrate that a complaint-based approach alone is limited in its effectiveness in abating noise. And without a broader comprehensive strategy, a reactive regulatory approach leads to low enforcement and increased neighborhood conflict. Lesson number 2 is data collection. Data collection is a key part of a noise observatory. Without data, jurisdictions cannot quantify or locate a problem with noise pollution. And almost all the observatories that we studied collect quantitative data such as noise levels, sources of noise, and changes of noise over time, often making this data freely accessible to the public. The third lesson is R&D. Observatories are well positioned to conduct new research and development in the field of noise management. Over half the benchmark jurisdictions we studied do extensive R&D work, and we found that those that are independent of government are doing particularly unique and innovative research, such as a project from Acousité in Lyon that explores the use of vegetation as natural soundproofing. Number 4 is engaging with multiple stakeholders. Noise is a multidisciplinary issue, and we mentioned that before, and it involves many concerned parties that are all part of the noise conversation, and an observatory's success is linked to its ability to engage with all of these stakeholders. Most benchmark jurisdictions recognize the importance of stakeholder engagement, and the most successful observatories had permanent structures in place to engage with these stakeholders, such as including them on their board of directors, like at Bruit Paris in Paris. Public awareness is the 5th lesson that we took away from the benchmark jurisdictions. While noise is a fact of urban life, public awareness of noise pollution and its severe effects is not yet ubiquitous. Most of the benchmark observatories we studied recognize that residents are an important member of the conversation about noise, and they engage with the public in some way, including Sounds of New York City, which facilitates a summer camp for children to learn about sound. Number 6 is promoting soundscapes. As Sta previously mentioned, a narrow focus on noise abatement overlooks the types of sound that shape the identity of a city like Montreal, celebrating its culture and its natural habitat. Soundscaping is increasingly recognized as an important approach to studying and addressing noise. 4 of the jurisdictions we studied identify this as a key part of their activities, including the 100 Soundscapes of Japan that highlights and protects specific sounds unique to Japanese culture and nature. Now I'll pass to Matis, who's going to talk about the vision and components for a proposed observatory.
Merci, Janoah. Désolé pour les petits problèmes techniques, en espérant que ça ne se reproduise pas. Donc, juste avant de se lancer dans les caractéristiques spécifiques du modèle d'observatoire sonore qu'on propose pour la ville de Montréal, c'est important de comprendre le contexte dans lequel va s'inscrire cet observatoire. Le modèle d'observatoire qu'on propose, c'est un modèle qui est consultatif, où l'observatoire va transmettre ses travaux à la ville, qui va par la suite décider de ce qu'elle décide de mettre en application. Pour éviter un manque de coordination avec l'administration municipale, l'observatoire doit pouvoir s'arrimer aux structures existantes en matière de gestion du bruit et de l'environnement sonore. C'est donc essentiel que la ville alloue des ressources humaines et financières nécessaires au sein de ces structures déjà existantes de gestion du bruit et de l'environnement sonore pour pouvoir réussir à opérationnaliser les idées que l'observatoire va lui transmettre. À notre avis, c'est un prérequis nécessaire afin d'établir un pont durable entre les structures actuelles et le nouvel observatoire dont la ville cherche à se doter. Maintenant que c'est dit, passons au vif du sujet, au modèle qu'on propose à la ville pour la création d'un observatoire de l'environnement sonore. La première chose qu'on a voulu établir, c'est l'essence de l'observatoire, son identité et sa vision. Vous avez à l'écran la vision qu'on suggère. On parle d'une organisation qui est interdisciplinaire, qui rassemble les gens et les institutions afin de garantir un environnement sonore sain, agréable et dynamique à Montréal. Pour nous, en une phrase, c'est ce à quoi doit aspirer un observatoire sonore pour la métropole. Afin d'articuler cette vision-là et de la concrétiser, notre rapport suggère 5 composantes principales autour desquelles devraient graviter les activités de l'observatoire. Ces 5 composantes-là sont en quelque sorte des catégories parapluies, spécifiques mais larges à la fois, qui visent à structurer l'ensemble des activités et opérations de l'observatoire. Et les composantes, en fait, elles sont presque identiques aux leçons que Janoah vient tout juste de présenter, puisqu'elles sont le fruit des apprentissages que notre recherche nous a apportés. D'abord, on considère que l'observatoire doit se consacrer à la collecte de données. Sans données claires et crédibles, ce n'est pas possible d'identifier des solutions réellement adaptées aux problèmes identifiés, ni au contexte dans lequel ces problèmes-là vont se manifester. En fait, c'est même souvent difficile de correctement identifier les problèmes de départ eux-mêmes. Les données collectées devraient être autant quantitatives que qualitatives, puisque le bruit et les sons sont perçus différemment et subjectivement par tout un chacun, et c'est important, en plus des niveaux de bruit mesurés par des capteurs sonores, d'aussi comprendre comment les bruits sont interprétés et perçus par la population. Les données permettraient, entre autres, à l'Observatoire de produire des cartes de bruit, un outil d'une très grande valeur pour comprendre les réalités sonores. Et toutes les données, ainsi que les cartes de bruit, devraient être, à notre avis, accessibles en format open access afin de contribuer sans obstacle à la communauté de recherche et être accessibles à la population générale. La seconde composante de l'Observatoire devrait se consacrer à la construction d'expertise et de connaissances. En traduisant les données brutes en informations agrégées et vulgarisées, l'Observatoire pourrait contribuer à la croissance des connaissances et au processus d'adoption de politiques publiques basées sur des faits probants. La construction de cette expertise elle pourrait passer par la production de rapports réguliers ou ponctuels par des experts maison, par la collaboration à des projets de recherche, de développement et d'innovation en technologie sonore, et par la contribution directe ou indirecte au processus de création des politiques publiques. La troisième composante, c'est celle de la collaboration. Comme Janoah l'a mentionné, les problématiques et opportunités reliées au bruit et à l'environnement sonore concernent une quantité importante de parties prenantes et une approche en silo a tendance à limiter le développement de solutions efficaces et coordonnées. C'est crucial qu'un éventuel observatoire à Montréal agisse en tant que guichet unique en matière de bruit et d'environnement sonore, en tant que la table autour de laquelle l'ensemble des parties prenantes concernées vont converger. En étant le catalyseur des expertises et des perspectives, l'Observatoire pourrait contribuer à la construction d'une compréhension partagée des réalités et favoriser le développement de solutions plus efficaces et consensuelles. En plus de rassembler les partenaires, l'Observatoire pourrait aussi collaborer directement avec les arrondissements, avec le 311 et avec le 911, qui conserveraient d'ailleurs leur rôle de premier répondant en matière de bruit, pour les aider à améliorer leurs pratiques. La quatrième composante proposée concerne la communication dirigée vers le public et sa sensibilisation aux enjeux de bruit. Les questions de bruit et d'environnement sonore sont parfois complexes et la population gagnerait à mieux comprendre les effets du bruit sur son quotidien. En se consacrant à des activités de sensibilisation, l'Observatoire pourrait augmenter les connaissances du public en matière de bruit et d'environnement sonore, favoriser la modification des comportements citoyens et réduire les insatisfactions en matière de nuisances sonores. Des stratégies adaptées à différents publics, comme le secteur privé, les écoles ou les regroupements d'industrie, par exemple, pourraient permettre de rejoindre ces populations de manière encore plus significative et adaptée à leurs réalités respectives. La dernière composante qu'on propose, elle permettrait en quelque sorte à l'Observatoire de sortir des sentiers battus et de se consacrer à des activités culturelles visant à célébrer le patrimoine et la personnalité sonore de Montréal, afin de valoriser cet aspect souvent négligé de la personnalité des villes. L'Observatoire pourrait favoriser les pratiques de soundscaping afin de bénéficier des effets positifs que les sons agréables peuvent avoir. Il pourrait aussi inciter les collaborations avec des artistes, avec des musées ou avec différentes initiatives touristiques qui mettent les sons au centre de l'expérience des touristes. Je vais maintenant passer la parole à Enzo, qui va se pencher plus en détail sur la structure de gouvernance que notre équipe propose pour un éventuel observatoire sonore à Montréal.
Merci beaucoup, Matis. Before going to governance structure, I just want to restate what my colleague Matis just mentioned before. It is important to note that the Observatory is a consultative body that advises the city with its research and data because it's constantly monitoring and reflecting on the state of noise in Montreal. This is why the Observatory can support the city as it develops its future noise policy. For the governance structure, we're proposing a structural partnership governance structure for Montreal's Noise Observatory. Structural partnership means an independent organization that will work in explicit partnership with external stakeholders. This model of governance combines best efficiency, structure, constant collaboration, independence, and proactivity. Given the interjurisdictional nature of noise, particularly noise related to road traffic, there are opportunities for expanding the observatory activities to multiple jurisdictions or at the provincial level. This is why we're recommending that the observatory be a public, not-for-profit organization at arm's length from the city so that it can collaborate with various levels of government and jurisdictions across Quebec. Like Lyon in Paris, the observatory would need to have a board of directors that would be responsible for the strategic direction of the organization, that would also oversee functions such as the administration, finance of the observatory. For a board of directors, the board would gather municipal, provincial, and federal elected officials and civil servants, but it's important to note that they would hold a minority position in the composition of the board. There's going to be members from the civil society members, expert scientists and the academic community, and private sector members. As I just mentioned, this structure resembles Lyon's Acousité and Paris' Paris observatories, because a diverse board of directors would ensure diversity in the governance of the organization. Different perspectives and type of expertise will strengthen the observatory. However, it's important to note that for the board of directors, it needs to be non-partisan on specific issues. Partisanship can affect the observatory's credibility and public opinion. The daily operations and research will be conducted under an executive director and her staff. Finance. It is recommended that the funding structure for the observatory include multiple sources from municipal, provincial, federal, academic, philanthropic, and many others. The diverse source of funding helps to ensure independence of the observatory. However, for the first 5 years should be fully funded by the City of Montreal to provide the observatory with some initial financial stability. This would allow the observatory to focus on its operations, research, and build legitimacy, which can enable them to find more diverse funding in the future. Independence is very important for the observatory. It needs the freedom to disseminate its independent commentary and views with respect to noise issues without undue interference by any external parties. This would again build its reputation as an independent center of expertise in the eyes of the public. Proactivity. Some observatories only respond to ad hoc requests. This should not be the case for Montreal. Montreal Observatory should proactively identify situations where its input can be relevant and convince stakeholders when it could positively contribute to public dialogue. For the last point, the observatory in Montreal can collaborate with its surrounding municipalities to tackle the issue of noise. The observatory can share their expertise with its municipal counterparts, like Lyon in Paris, where they have strong collaboration agreements with multiple cities in Europe. For a recommendation overview, we need to understand that the uniqueness of this project allowed us to work on the type of organization that doesn't currently exist in Canada. This is why we provided 37 recommendations that covers all aspects of an observatory. This presentation covers the key aspect of a recommendation that gives a clear overview of the situation. As we can see it here, 22 for vision, mission, components, activities, 11 for governance structure, 2 for Montreal prerequisite actions, 2 observatory model and name. As a conclusion, we need to understand that as cities grow and develop, sound management is an increasingly important issue of public policy. Noise pollution has a wide range of negative consequences on public health, the economy, and the environment. Montreal's current noise management strategy is predominantly a regulatory approach, and it has had limited effectiveness, particularly with regards to data and research on impacts. By establishing an independent observatory at arm's length from the city, Montreal has the opportunity to be the first city in Canada to establish a sound observatory that provides high quality data on noise. It would bring together stakeholders from various industries and sectors who have historically been part of the noise debate but have never convened in such manner. It would also favor citizens' engagement through public awareness campaigns and celebrate Montreal's sound personality and sound heritage. And the Observatoire Montréalais de l'Environnement Sonore will be the future of sound in Montreal and position Montreal to be a North American leader in noise pollution management. It will bring forward more proactive approaches to noise management by being an integral actor to developing Montreal's noise policy and cultivate new approaches to soundscaping to further Montreal's quality of life. To end our presentation, our team would like to present to you the logo that we imagined for the observatory that materialized our proposal. On this note, we would like to thank you, the City of Montreal, Professor Dr. Willsie, faculty members and the McGill team, and my favorite team among all the policy lab teams, Matis, Sta, Janoah, Aria. On this note, have a good day.
Thank you, team. That was wonderful. We are now going to begin the Q&A period. We're going to start with Will Straw. Will, who's been the coach and the support for this team over the course of the last 6 months, and a notable expert on sound across the world as well, and urban life. And then after Will's question to the team, we'll be moving on to the Ville de Montréal team. Anybody from the Ville de Montréal that has questions, I will ask you to turn on your video and your sound in a few minutes and ask questions to the team. So Will, let's begin with you.
Okay, well, first of all, congratulations to all of you, and thank you for the pleasure of working with you over the last several months. I mean, it began what seems like a lifetime ago. And I just want to say, Janoah, when this slide presentation disappeared, you were a model of calm and resourcefulness in getting through that. So hats off to you. My question, I guess, is, since you began working on this, two things have happened that might possibly have altered your approach. One of them is that very recently Montreal has named Commissaire du Bruit et de la Nuit, who may be among us, in fact, today. And the second, of course, is COVID-19. In the light of both of those, are there ways in which you might have changed, revised, expanded your recommendations or your overall analysis?
I can go for this one, or at least for the first part. Thanks, Will, for the question, and thanks for your work with us through this whole project. It was amazing to have you as our coach. So for the first part, regarding the nighttime commissioner or the noise commissioner, the new position that Montreal just created, actually, we feel that it falls into the, if you remember the slides before it went out, that talked about the prerequisites actions for Montreal, where we think that Montreal needs to devote the sufficient resources to its current structures. That's exactly what it shows right now. Montreal has identified the fact that they needed someone to hold that position within the city, to coordinate the current actions the city undertakes. And we feel that that position could easily bridge the observatory and the city's current practices. So we think that it's a good step in the right direction. And actually, it would not lead us to change anything we've done. It reinforces, I think, the model that we propose for Montreal. And maybe for the part on COVID-19, maybe Sta, if you could, I think it could relate to the part that you worked on a lot.
Right. So COVID-19, I think that's a good question. And for a lot of policy areas, COVID-19 has been an opportunity for, I think, for policymakers to realize whether they need to redirect some of their policy efforts or develop new ones. So when it came up during our project, there was a lot of news stories that were coming out, even in Montreal. So some of them said, you know, people living in Montreal are realizing just how quiet the city is without all of the hustle and bustle, and they love it. And that was interesting for us to look at and say, okay, so, you know, there are people in this city who maybe are now starting to realize that there's a value in noise reduction, and that maybe the city is a lot noisier than it needs to be. And then there are people who are also writing about how much they miss the sounds of Montreal. So the sounds of, you know, all of the things we hear during festival season or music in the streets around this time of year or in the spring. So I think there are two opportunities here that, again, places an observatory really well, if we had one right now, is to, one, reevaluate how Montreal can bring back some of those sounds that we miss and reinforce them and promote them. And then 2, maybe look at what are the noises that we didn't have during COVID-19 and how can we reduce them? That way residents actually can have that quality of life again that they had, obviously minus the pandemic, but I think there's a lot of good opportunities for the observatory there as well.
Great answers, thank you.
Thank you, Sta, Matis, and Will for the question. We're now going to be moving to the Ville de Montréal team. So if I could ask Christina, Deborah, Katia, and anybody else from the Ville de Montréal team to turn on your video and to turn on your mics, and we will begin the Q&A from the team on the ground.
Bonjour à tous.
Bonjour Déborah.
Alors, j'ai pas de vidéo. Mais effectivement, donc mon nom est Déborah Delaunay, je suis la fameuse commissaire bruit et nuit. Donc, pour commencer, félicitations. Nous, on vous a suivi depuis plusieurs mois sur ce projet, puis vous avez vraiment fait un travail remarquable. Puis les résultats que vous nous proposez sont extrêmement inspirants pour nous. Donc, premièrement, merci. Alors, je peux démarrer ma vidéo. Donc, par rapport à la présentation de ce matin, j'aurais peut-être 3 questions à vous poser. La première question qui me vient à l'esprit tout de suite, dans la mesure où cette organisation serait un OBNL, donc qui ne ferait pas de profit, qui pourrait être membre de cette OBNL? Il ne me semble pas que vous l'aviez traité. J'ai vu le bureau des directeurs, donc les personnes qui vont organiser, on a parlé des parties prenantes qui pourraient être impliquées, mais concrètement, est-ce que monsieur, madame, tout le monde pourrait adhérer à une telle organisation?
Je peux répondre à ce... Merci beaucoup, Déborah, pour la question. Lorsque nous avons fait nos recherches, surtout avec Acousité et Paris Bruit Paris, nous avons analysé leur structure de conseil d'administration et nous avons conclu que on doit réserver une partie pour les sociétés civiles. C'est pour ça que nous avons précisé que tous les groupes qui étaient excusez-moi pour l'anglicisme, pour les advocates, pour le noise issue, ils vont trouver un centre où ils peuvent se réunir avec des experts en matière, avec des politiciens, avec des fonctionnaires sur l'enjeu pour diversifier le point de vue et avoir une opinion diverse sur l'enjeu pour trouver une solution commune pour un problème commun.
De manière plus concrète, est-ce qu'il y aurait des représentants, par exemple des citoyens qui seraient sur le bureau des directeurs ou qui auraient une place dans un comité consultatif, par exemple?
Mathis, tu veux complémenter?
Oui, ben en fait, oui. Dans l'idée qu'on a, puis non, dans le rapport, on n'est pas allé en détail sur les membres spécifiquement parce qu'on se disait que ça serait peut-être contingent au processus de création véritable de l'Observatoire. Mais dans la catégorie des membres de la société civile, pour nous, absolument, ça inclut autant des organisations que des citoyens de manière individuelle ou des citoyennes qui voudraient, pour qui le bruit et les questions sonores sont importantes et qui veulent contribuer à ce pan-là de la réalité montréalaise.
Merci Enzo et Mathis pour la question. J'aurais une deuxième question, c'est concrètement, selon vous, quelle devrait être la place des chercheurs qui travaillent sur le bruit environnemental et l'environnement sonore au Québec au sein de cet observatoire?
Je suis d'accord avec des consultations avec les différents acteurs de Acoustique, Bruit Paris ou les autres organisations. C'est primordial de garder une place importante pour le rechercheur parce que c'est ça qui donne sa richesse à l'observatoire, son expertise, et que, comme vous avez dit, le recherche et développement, plus ils réunissent des experts en matière, plus ça donne de la crédibilité, plus il y a un support public, plus la population sont au courant des enjeux actuels et plus l'Observatoire pourra diversifier ses opérations. Mais pour revenir à la question, la place des scientifiques doit être au centre de l'Observatoire.
Est-ce qu'on peut envisager que l'Observatoire anime un réseau de recherche ou bien ait un conseil scientifique au sein de son modèle de gouvernance?
Comme on l'a vu, c'est Paris ou Léon qui a un conseil scientifique qui supporte leur conseil d'administration. Et ça, la raison que nous n'avons pas allé en détail dans le fond, c'est que tout s'est concrétisé à partir de leur bylaw interne. Excusez-moi, je ne trouve pas le mot français pour bylaw. Mais c'est une fois qu'ils auront trouvé leur opération et leur directive intérieure et leur leur directive interne, il y a une opportunité multiple pour créer des comités ad hoc, des centres d'expertise, des conseils d'expertise ou même des conseils d'expertise régionaux qui peuvent travailler en commun pour contrer cet enjeu.
Merci, Déborah, pour vos questions. C'est très, très intéressant comme question. Je sais, Déborah, que vous êtes une grande experte dans le secteur et vous avez été une grande ressource aussi pour l'équipe à travers le projet pour votre connaissance du dossier. Je vais passer la parole à Christina. Christina, avez-vous une question pour l'équipe?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to congratulate the group because you did a wonderful job and it's been a pleasure working with you, and the level of your presentation and recommendations has been really, really high, and it was our pleasure to work with you. So congratulations, and I know that it's your final project, so you did a great job. And my question was, from the number of recommendations that you worked on, is there any recommendation that maybe generated more debate internally for your team? And if so, or discussion, and if so, why?
I could maybe take this one and someone wants to add. Yeah, so in my opinion, I think one topic that gained a lot of debate is whether we want to have this as an independent government body or an independent organization of government, or whether we want to have it as a government body funded by the government. And for us, I had from the cities I analyzed, I looked at cities that had departments that focused on sound and noise and improvements to that, and they were functioned as a government body and they worked effectively. However, we ultimately decided that an independent organization would function more effectively and be able to work in the interest of all stakeholders without having partisanship. Because one problem that we did see was that any nightmare that was appointed was able to perhaps have difficulty in implementing tasks because they're following the mandate of the current leader and not really the mandate of, they're not following the interest of all stakeholders. So we decided that an independent body would be best suited for the observatory. But if anyone would like to add to that, or
well, maybe quickly and kind of related to that whole thought process we had was also the one of having political affiliated people on the board of directors or not. And it was two options: have nobody from the political side on the board, or have kind of everybody from the political side on the board. And based on what we saw in other jurisdictions, we believe that having political elected officials, but also civil servants on the board was the best option to ensure good collaboration between an independent organization and the city. But we needed some safeguards to ensure that the observatory would still keep its independence, and having that type of members as the fact that they say a minority on the board was important for us to ensure that balance between having them represented and chipping in, but also not taken over with political interests.
Thank you for that. Katia, did you have a question for the team? And then we'll move on to Julie that also has a question after. Go ahead, Katia.
Absolutely. Well, I echo my colleagues' positive comments. It's been a pleasure working with all of you. We're very impressed with the final report and presentation. And actually, the fact that you tackled such a lesser known topic, I mean, except for Deborah and Dr. Straw, of course, there aren't that many, people who really specialize in such a topic, at least in Montreal and in Quebec in general. So well done for tackling this topic. I have two questions. The first one is around, two topics in terms of duality. The first one being Montreal or big city versus region. So what is, obviously in the 11 cities you've analyzed, the sort of governance structures and regional and level of local independence varies. This being said, what have you observed is the usual dynamic or the best dynamic between the metropolis where the observatory is based and the larger regions, surrounding regions, or even the suburbs, nearer areas? That would be my first question. And I think I'll ask both, that way you guys can jump in. My second question is around the duality between nighttime and noise. As you said, noise is noise being noise and sound, really, As you said, in many cities, there's been nighttime mayors or nighttime managers that were named, and how important was sound as part of their mandate? And was that topic too diluted by being sort of incorporated within nights, or on the opposite, gained more sort of, you know, traction by being sort of combined? So these would be my two questions. Thanks.
I'll jump in for the first part, and the second part my colleague will complement with the nightmares. First of all, like Acoustique in Lyon has a collaboration with almost all European cities, some of them which is Saint-Etienne or Monaco, that you would think has the necessary resources to tackle this issue. But Lyon has the expertise that they share with the local staff to tackle the same issue that they face. So if we brought back this issue to Quebec, which is people who live in Montreal will face the same level of discrepancy with noise pollution in Montreal, and some people live in Shawinigan because maybe they can have a construction going nearby their house, or there's a boat or railroad. So the issue, the problem that we're living in, it's equal to everyone across Quebec, and that's why I think a collaboration and diverse point of opinion and having the expertise in Montreal can help tackle the issues across Quebec and across Canada.
So I'll talk about nightmares and that kind of nighttime versus other noise. And I think, so two parts. First of all, some of the jurisdictions we studied that just have nightmares, they were doing some very innovative, some of them were doing some very innovative things. Like in Amsterdam, they were doing some interesting kind of pilot projects to try to limit the amount of noise, like having 24-hour licenses so that bars could be open 24 hours and there's not that like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. rush of people leaving the bar. And so that there is a lot of like innovation there, but one of the things that we found for Montreal is that although nighttime noise and that kind of nightlife industry is something that people are very disturbed by and get really upset about, it is in fact not the primary source of noise that is causing these other health problems. That's more related to the construction and the traffic and railways, that kind of thing, that is constantly elevated levels of noise that is affecting people all the time. So while the observatory definitely should have one of their priorities should be nightlife noise, we ultimately didn't decide that they should focus on that because of these other areas. And I think that one of the things we found is that these other jurisdictions that have a more diverse portfolio, a more diverse observatory, like in Lyon, like in Paris, that they were able to address those nighttime noise issues in this broader structure of noise in general, because they had those things like engaging with stakeholders, because they were collecting the data and understanding like, this is the area of the city that has the most issues at this time. So I think if it's recognized as a very important pillar of the observatory, but not, that it doesn't have to be kind of like absorbed in and diluted in its solutions. So yeah, I think that there is that tension, but I think it's possible if the observatory is doing all of the data collection and consultation that we recommend, there shouldn't be ultimately a problem.
Thank you, Janoah, and thank you, Kasia, for your question. We have 3 more questions, and if anybody else in the audience has questions, please let us know. If I could just ask the team to be a bit more succinct in your responses so we can cover at least the 3 that we have in line. So our next question comes from Julie Da Silva, then will be followed by Maha Bereshid, and as Chris Reagan will follow in the 3rd question. So Julie, please proceed.
Oui, bonjour à tous, vous m'entendez? J'ai des petits soucis informatiques, donc désolée, je ne peux pas mettre ma caméra, ouvrir ma caméra. Alors, je travaille avec Christina sur les collaborations avec les établissements d'enseignement supérieur. Alors, on est très, très content d'avoir pu collaborer avec vous et félicitations. Je me joins à tous les autres collègues pour vous dire que c'était une très belle présentation, très instructif et c'est toujours un plaisir de collaborer avec les étudiants et de leur ouvrir les portes de la ville. Donc, voilà. J'avais une question sur, j'aimerais vous amener sur la question des données. Alors, on sait que les données sont un peu le nerf de la guerre pour une bonne prise de décision et ça faisait partie là, de votre présentation. J'aimerais savoir, dans les modèles que vous avez regardés à travers le monde, est-ce qu'il y a des modèles ou des structures qui sont peut-être plus efficaces pour digérer toute cette quantité importante d'informations que les chercheurs vont pouvoir ou d'autres parties prenantes vont pouvoir transmettre à leur observatoire et ensuite pour pouvoir transférer tout ça à la ville d'une façon peut-être efficace pour une meilleure prise de décision. Parce qu'on voit souvent qu'à la ville, les fonctionnaires, les élus sont quand même pas toujours familiers avec ce genre de dossier, n'ont pas toujours le temps de digérer une quantité importante d'informations. Alors, j'aimerais savoir si vous avez exploré certains mécanismes ou modèles pour permettre ce transfert-là un peu plus facile de l'observatoire aux parties prenantes qui sont les élus et les fonctionnaires.
So I can start with that question. So in terms of the jurisdictions that we researched internationally, some of the things that they were doing for data collection, so first for data collection, a lot of them had sensors that would monitor the level of noise. And then in some cases in New York City, something that was really interesting and innovative that they were doing is making recordings and using machine learning to identify what sound is in the recordings. And that way they can identify what are the problem sounds, because maybe it is in one area, a certain machine or a construction. So those were some of the best practices in terms of collecting sound data. And a lot of jurisdictions that we studied used this data to create noise maps. So it would, and often online, available online for everyone to look at. In fact, if you want to see the noise maps for Lyon, for Paris, they are available on and even in Madrid, Barcelona, a lot of these European cities, they're available online and they track the levels of noise at certain times of the day, the historical data, that sort of thing. So you can tell what areas are the loudest. And then what a lot of these jurisdictions did, either in the government or at the observatory, is determine the areas that, target areas, the things that are most important to do. So that's one of the things, like transmitting to policy makers. We don't see the observatory just handing the data to the policymakers and saying good luck. For our model, we see that the observatory does that analysis and then provides recommendations to the policymakers about this is the areas that you need to address. These are the parts of the city that has the most problems. So that's kind of what we've seen in international benchmark jurisdictions.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Janoah, for that question. Maha, ask your question, please.
Oui, bonjour, merci beaucoup. Puis je me joins à tous mes collègues pour dire que la présentation était très bonne. On voit que c'est un travail d'expertise, c'est très rassurant. Donc, encore un grand merci. J'ai deux petites questions. J'ai eu des petits problèmes de connexion. Donc, à un moment donné, je pense que j'étais dans la slide sur la structure de financement. Puis, je voulais savoir si vous aviez un peu plus de détails sur comment un observatoire de la sorte pourrait être pérenne et comment les acteurs et l'ensemble de l'écosystème peuvent contribuer à la structure de financement. Donc, ça, c'est la première question. La deuxième, c'est en ce qui a trait, c'est, je pense, la slide 17. Vous avez parlé des différentes composantes. J'ai trouvé ça très intéressant. Vous finissez par des activités de sensibilisation et, je pense, des documents pour les politiques publiques. Donc, je me questionnais à savoir, normalement, un observatoire de données, on essaye qu'il soit le plus neutre possible. Est-ce que des activités comme ça pourraient amener une certaine divergence en termes pour les parties prenantes, s'ils sont de différentes pensées, etc. Et comment vous voyez l'arrimage de tout ça? Donc, voilà.
Merci beaucoup, Mme Béréchid, pour votre question. En ce qui concerne le financement, le but ultime, c'est d'être indépendant financièrement et ne pas être soumis à un parti pris juste à cause qu'ils financent la grosse majorité de leur parti. Comme l'exemple de Léon en ce moment, leur plus grand acteur de financement, c'est maximum 30%. Alors, ça montre que si cet acteur décide de sortir de la table, ils sont quand même capables de... C'est quand même un gros bout du budget, mais ils sont quand même capables de continuer leur opération quotidienne. Mais dans le contexte de Montréal, c'est un observatoire qui n'a pas fait ses preuves, que la population ne sont pas encore au courant. Et aussi pour assurer sa stabilité dans les premières années d'opération. C'est pour ça que nous recommandons qu'au moins pour les 5 premières années, le financement doit venir catégoriquement de la Ville de Montréal. Et ce, pour s'assurer qu'il fasse ses preuves, qu'il fasse ses recherches et rapports. Et une fois qu'ils montrent leur valeur qu'ils rajoutent au débat public sur le bruit, ça serait beaucoup plus facile d'attirer des financements soit par des partis privés, par le secteur privé, par des donations philanthropiques ou soit même par des universités qui demandent des recherches précises ou même aussi on revient avec les municipalités au Québec ou au Canada qui vont approcher la ville qui va approcher l'Observatoire du Nord de Montréal et proposer un projet et par la suite, les collaborations multiples peuvent assurer une indépendance financière de l'Observatoire.
Je peux peut-être embarquer rapidement pour la deuxième question en ce qui est de est-ce qu'il risque d'y avoir des divergences? Peut-être, puis c'est peut-être ça qu'on cherche aussi. C'est peut-être pas une mauvaise chose en ayant une diversité de contributeurs puis de parties prenantes sur la table, d'avoir chacune des voix qui amènent une perspective puis un point de vue en termes de réalité sonore à Montréal, puis de créer une genre de, si je peux dire, une réalité consensuelle ou une réalité co-construite qui va permettre d'adresser les problèmes. Donc, autant les gens pour qui le bruit présentement est une nuisance, qui veulent des solutions, que les gros pollueurs sonores, je pense par exemple à l'aéroport, qui est constamment pointé du doigt et qui va voir aussi l'Observatoire comme une solution et qui va vouloir contribuer pour se sortir de cette position-là où on est constamment le problème. Donc, peut-être qu'il y aurait de la divergence, mais peut-être que ce n'est pas une mauvaise chose non plus.
Merci, Maha. Merci, Matis et Enzo. And I think that is a beautiful sentiment to say that maybe there will be divergence, but maybe that's what we want. I think that's a beautiful sentiment. Thank you for that. Chris, final question for the session for this team's year and the end of their policy lab. And I will ask the team if you could keep your answers within 2 to 3 minutes. That would be great. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you very much. Actually, it relates to the previous question. But thank you very much for this presentation. It's very cool. It's a very cool policy lab topic. And I really liked the collecting the lessons learned from all of the other cases that you looked at. I think that was very effective. So my question is, you're proposing this, I think you used the term quasi-independent noise observatory. And my question is really about how you achieve the independence. So Aria's answer, I think, to the first question was you debated this. Now, there's 2 things in independence, at least 2 things to debate. One is, do you want it to be independent, and if so, why? The other is, even if you do want it to be independent, how do you actually get it to be independent? So my question is really about the second. So you've got, your proposal is that beyond the first 5 years, you have multiple sources of funding. But for the first 5 years, it's all City of Montreal funding. Maybe you're suggesting that to kind of get it going. But my question is really, how do you maintain independence if for 5 years, all of the money, or even most of the money, is coming from the City of Montreal? Governments at all levels, it seems to me, are inherently uncomfortable with funding organizations that may tell them things, advise them things, to do things that are viewed as unpopular. They don't like to hear bad news. This would not be the first time that organizations are funded by governments and then shut down. So how do you really secure independence, especially in that first 5 years?
Thank you, Professor, for the question. The quick answer is bylaws. At the beginning of the establishment of the observatory, the bylaws needs to clearly define the role of each actors and what they can do within that jurisdiction. But also, if you mentioned that public funds been using as for observatories, we need to recall that the cost of inaction is way bigger than what it's going to cost to taxpayers, because noise is an issue of public health, environment, and economic. So this is why, since at the beginning, to ensure its independence, it needs to have clear bylaws and directives within the organization that limits specific groups' interference in their operations. And then this will be my answer to your question.
if I could just quickly compliment, I would also outline that the observatory would be a solution for the city's current problems. So, and the fact that it would be independent is what would make it work and be the most effective that it can be. So I think that for the city, there's that issue of we're giving money. So how do you make sure that it stays independent? But there's also that will of having it independent and financing something that's independent for better results that will better help improving policy. And there are examples of things, of similar organizations in Montreal. Quickly, like l'Office de Consultation Publique de Montréal is completely independent. It receives funding from the city, but the fact that it's independent, even if it's funded by the city, is what makes it effective.